When basketball legend Michael Jordan can't sleep one night, he finds himself drawn to the United Center where his bronze statue stands. There, he discovers something unexpected: an elderly man carefully cleaning his statue in the darkness. Most people would ignore the strange sight, but Jordan's curiosity gets the better of him. His decision to approach this dedicated stranger will lead to an extraordinary friendship that changes both their lives forever. Michael Jordan couldn't sleep. Again. At 58 years old, his mind still raced like it did before big games. Tonight felt different, though. Something pulled at him, tugged at his thoughts until he finally got out of bed. Just a drive, he told himself, slipping on jeans and a black hoodie. The streets of Chicago were quiet at this hour. His car hummed softly as streetlights cast long shadows. Without really planning to, he found himself driving toward the United Center, the place where fans still gathered to see the Bulls play, the place where his bronze statue stood, frozen mid-jump, basketball in hand. Jordan parked across the street. It was nearly midnight. The arena was dark except for a few security lights. He wasn't sure why he'd come here. Maybe just old habits. Basketball had always been his answer when sleep wouldn't come. That's when he spotted him. An elderly man stood at the base of his statue. At first, Jordan thought it might be security. But this man wasn't in uniform. He moved slowly, carefully wiping down the bronze figure with a soft cloth. The man had brought his own bucket and supplies. Jordan watched, puzzled. The old man seemed to be talking to the statue as he worked, his mouth moving in the dim light. He wore a weathered Chicago Bulls jacket, one of the old styles from the championship years in the 90s. "What in the world?" Jordan whispered to himself. The man wasn't a regular maintenance worker, that much was clear. His movements were too careful, too personal. And at this hour, something wasn't adding up. Jordan pulled his hood up and stepped out of his car. The night air felt cool against his face. He crossed the street quietly, keeping to the shadows. The old man didn't notice him. He was too focused on reaching the statue's outstretched arm with his cloth. "Almost got it," the old man muttered, stretching up on tiptoes. He wobbled slightly, his balance unsteady. Jordan moved closer. He could see the man's face now, wrinkled, determined, with deep-set eyes that squinted in concentration. His hands were bony and spotted with age, but they worked with surprising care. "The best there ever was," the old man said to the statue. "Got to keep you looking sharp." Jordan stopped a few feet away. He wasn't sure whether to speak or just walk away. This felt private somehow, like he was intruding on something personal. But curiosity won out. "You're doing a good job," Jordan said, his voice cutting through the night quiet. The old man jumped and nearly fell backward. His cleaning cloth dropped to the ground. When he turned and saw who had spoken, his eyes grew wide with shock. "Mr. Jordan, I wasn't doing anything wrong, I promise." His voice shook as he bent to pick up his cloth. I come here, sometimes to—" He stopped, clearly flustered. "It's okay," Jordan said, stepping forward. "I'm not security or anything. I was just driving by and saw you." The old man stared at him, mouth slightly open. He looked like he might faint. "Why don't you sit down for a minute?" Jordan pointed to a nearby bench. The old man nodded and shuffled to the bench. His legs seemed stiff, his movements painful. Once seated, he looked up at Jordan with an expression of wonder. "I can't believe it's really you," he said. "I've been cleaning your statue for years, and now here you are." "Years?" Jordan asked, sitting down beside him. "You've been coming here for years?" The old man nodded. "Twice a month, regular, as clockwork. Usually real late when nobody's around to bother me." Why? The man looked down at his weathered hands. Somebody's got to do it. Birds make a mess. Weather leaves dirt. Fans sometimes touch it too much in one spot. He shrugged. The greatest player ever should look his best. Jordan studied the man's face. His eyes were watery blue, tucked under bushy white eyebrows. Deep lines marked his cheeks. He had to be at least in his late 70s. "What's your name?" Jordan asked. "Walter Hayes," the man replied. "Taught math and coached basketball at Westside Community High for nearly 40 years. Jordan noticed Walter's hands were trembling slightly, and not just from the surprise of meeting him. "You work for the United Center?" Jordan asked, though he already knew the answer. Walter shook his head. "No, sir. Just a fan. Been watching the Bulls since before they were anything special." He smiled slightly. "Then you came along and changed everything." A security guard appeared at the corner of the building, flashlight in hand. Walter tensed. "It's okay," Jordan said, standing and waving to the guard. "He's with me, Tony." The guard recognized Jordan immediately. "Oh, Mr. Jordan. Sorry, sir. Didn't realize that was you." "No problem. Just catching some night air." The guard nodded and disappeared back around the corner. Walter let out a breath. "Thank you. Sometimes they shoo me away if they catch me." "How do you usually get away with it?" Walter's eyes twinkled. "I'm just an old man cleaning up litter as far as most folks can tell. I don't bother nobody." Jordan looked at the statue, then back at Walter. The statue was spotless, every curve and angle gleaming even in the dim light. "You do a better job than the professionals." Walter straightened with pride. "That's because they're just doing a job. I'm paying respect." Jordan noticed Walter's hands were shaking more now, and not from excitement. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pill box. "Need to take these," Walter explained. "Doctor's orders." Jordan looked at his watch. It was after midnight. "Have you eaten? There's an all-night diner about 2 blocks from here." Walter hesitated, looking at his cleaning supplies. "I can have someone put those away for you," Jordan said. "No need to trouble yourself, Mr. Jordan." "Michael," Jordan corrected. "And it's no trouble." He found himself curious about this man who had been quietly maintaining his statue for years without recognition or reward. There was a story here, and suddenly, Michael Jordan wanted to hear it. "How about that coffee?" he asked again. Walter looked at him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "I'd like that." Michael. The way Walter said his name, hesitant, almost reverent, made Jordan smile. Many people got nervous around him, but Walter's reaction felt different. There was respect there, but something else too. Something Jordan couldn't quite name. They walked slowly to the diner, matching Walter's careful pace. The old man had insisted on carrying his small bag of cleaning supplies, despite Jordan's offer to help. "Been taking care of myself a long time," Walter had said firmly. The diner's neon sign cast a blue-pink glow over the empty street. Lucy's. Open 24 hours. Inside, only 2 booths were occupied. A pair of tired-looking nurses in one, a truck, driver in another. The waitress did a double take when Jordan walked in but quickly composed herself. "Sit anywhere you like," she said, grabbing 2 menus. They chose a booth in the back corner. Walter set his bag carefully on the seat beside him. "Coffee for me," Jordan said. "And whatever my friend wants." "Coffee's fine," Walter said. "And maybe some toast." When the waitress left, Walter looked around nervously, then back at Jordan. "You? No, most people wouldn't give me a second look," he said. "Just another old man roaming around at night. But you noticed me." Hard not to notice someone cleaning my statue at midnight, Jordan replied with a smile. Walter's cheeks flushed slightly. I suppose it does seem strange. How long have you been doing this, Walter? Really? Walter thought for a moment. 6 years now. Twice a month at least. More if the weather's bad. That's dedication. Well, they don't clean it enough, Walter said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. Maintenance just gives it a quick spray now and then. That's not right, for what? That statue means. The waitress returned with their coffee and Walter's toast. She hovered for a moment, clearly wanting to say something to Jordan, but thought better of it and left. Jordan studied Walter as he carefully spread a thin layer of butter on his toast. His hands trembled slightly, but there was precision in his movements. You said you coached basketball? Jordan asked. Walter nodded, his face brightening. 42 years at West Side. Taught math too, but basketball was my real love. Were you any good? As a coach, I mean. Walter chuckled. 3 city championships. Nothing fancy. Could have been more if I'd had players like you. He took a sip of coffee. I played a bit myself back in high school. Had a decent jump shot. What happened? Blew out my knee senior year. This was before all the fancy surgeries they have now. Walter shrugged. So I taught, instead. Jordan nodded. He understood how quickly basketball dreams could end. You have family, Walter? The question made Walter pause. He set down his coffee cup carefully. My wife, Eleanor, passed 3 years ago. 47 years together. His voice softened. We had a son, Bobby. Something in the way Walter said his son's name, past tense, tinged with sadness, made Jordan hold back further questions. Walter seemed to shake off a dark thought. What about you? How are your kids doing? They talked about Jordan's children for a while. Walter seemed genuinely interested, asking thoughtful questions. For a brief time, they were just 2 men chatting, not a legend and his unusual fan. When they finished their coffee, Walter reached for his wallet. I've got it, Jordan said. I can pay my own way, Walter insisted, a flash of pride in his eyes. I know you can. But humor me. Walter hesitated, then nodded. As he put his wallet back, several orange prescription bottles peeked from his jacket pocket. He quickly tucked them away when he noticed Jordan looking. Outside, the night had grown colder. Walter zipped his bull's jacket up to his neck. Where's your car? Jordan asked. Don't drive anymore. Doctor's orders. Walter pointed down the street. I take the bus. Stops just around the corner. At this hour, let me drive you home. No need to trouble yourself. I've been riding the night bus for years, Jordan insisted, and finally, Walter agreed. As they walked back to Jordan's car, Walter stumbled on an uneven part of the sidewalk. Jordan caught his arm, steadying him. You okay? Just these old legs, Walter said, embarrassed. They don't always do what I tell them. In the car, Walter gave directions to an apartment building in a modest neighborhood about 20 minutes away. They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Why my statue, Walter? Jordan finally asked. Of all the things you could do with your time. Walter looked out the window, watching the city lights pass by. When I was coaching, I used to tell my players about you. Not just your skills, but your work ethic. How you never gave up. He turned to face Jordan. That statue isn't just bronze, you know. It's a reminder that greatness is possible. That matters. Jordan had heard many people praise him over the years, but something about Walter's simple explanation touched him. When they reached Walter's building, Jordan pulled to the curb. Thank you for the ride. And the coffee, Walter said, gathering. His cleaning supplies. "Thank you for taking care of my statue all these years," Jordan replied. "Not many would notice or care." Walter nodded and opened the car door. Before stepping out, he turned back. "Same time next month, then," he said, with a small smile. "That statue won't clean itself." Jordan watched as Walter walked slowly up the steps to his building. There was something about the old coach that stuck with him, his dedication, his quiet dignity. As Jordan drove away, he knew this wouldn't be their last meeting. Something told him Walter Hayes had more stories to tell. Jordan couldn't shake thoughts of the old man from his mind the next day. While his personal assistant, Tia, briefed him on upcoming meetings, Jordan found himself distracted. "Is everything okay?" Tia asked, noticing his faraway look. "Yeah, just thinking about someone I met last night," Jordan replied. He explained the strange encounter at his statue. Tia listened with growing interest. "So this man has been cleaning your statue for years, and nobody knew about it?" she asked. "Apparently. Think you could find out a little more about him?" Walter Hayes, retired basketball coach and math teacher at Westside Community High. Tia nodded. "Consider it done." That evening, Jordan found himself driving back to Walter's neighborhood. He hadn't planned to return so soon, but curiosity pulled him there. He spotted Walter sitting on a bench in a small park across from his apartment building. The old man was tossing breadcrumbs to a group of pigeons. Jordan parked and walked over. Walter looked up, surprise crossing his face. "Michael Jordan. Twice in 2 days. People will start talking," Walter said with a smile. "Mind if I join you?" Walter scooted over, making room on the bench. Free country, even for basketball legends. They sat in comfortable silence for a minute, watching the pigeons fight over the crumbs. "My wife used to scold me for feeding them," Walter finally said. "Said I was encouraging pests, but she still made sure I had stale bread to bring them." His eyes crinkled at the memory. "You miss her," Jordan said. It wasn't a question. "Every day for 3 years," Walter replied. "Some mornings I still make 2 cups of coffee." He shook his head. "Habits are hard to break after 47 years. "How did you meet?" Walter's face brightened. "She was a science teacher at Westside. Smart as a whip and pretty as a picture. Way out of my league." He chuckled. "She used to come to my basketball games even though she knew nothing about the sport. Said she liked watching me get all worked up on the sidelines." As the afternoon light began to fade, Walter suggested they walk to a small diner around the corner. "Best meatloaf in Chicago, if you're interested." The diner was modest but clean. A few patrons glanced up when Jordan entered. But the neighborhood wasn't one where celebrities were common, and most quickly returned to their meals. After they ordered, Walter pulled out his wallet and removed a worn photograph. He handed it to Jordan. "That's my Bobby. This was taken when he was 17. The photo showed a tall, lean young man with Walter's eyes and smile, wearing a Bulls jersey, number 23, Jordan's number. "He was a good player," Walter said proudly. "Not great, but good. Had a better head for numbers than basketball, truth be told. Became an accountant." Jordan handed the photo back. "You must be proud." Walter carefully returned the photo to his wallet. "He was crazy about the Bulls, about you especially. We watched every game together during the championship runs." His voice grew softer. "Basketball was our special bond." Jordan noticed how Walter kept referring to his son in the past. Tense but didn't press. Walter would share more when he was ready. Their food arrived, and conversation shifted to lighter topics. Walter had strong opinions about basketball strategy and didn't hesitate to share them. "The game's different now," he said, cutting his meatloaf into careful squares. All this three-point shooting. In my day, we worked for a good shot. The analytics say, Jordan began. Analytics! Walter interrupted with a snort. I taught math for 40 years, and I'll tell you, basketball isn't just numbers, it's heart and hustle too. Jordan found himself enjoying Walter's old-school perspective. The man had watched the game evolve over decades and had coached hundreds of young players. His insights were sharp, his memory impressive. After dinner, Walter insisted on paying his share. You got the coffee last night. My turn. As they left the diner, a cool breeze had picked up. Walter zipped his Bulls jacket and pulled out a pill bottle from his pocket. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to open it. Allow me, Jordan said, taking the bottle. He opened it and handed it back. Walter looked embarrassed, but took 2 pills with a sip from his water bottle. Parkinson's? Jordan asked gently. Walter shook his head. Just old age and poor circulation. Doctors have me on all kinds of things these days. He pocketed the bottle. Gets worse in the cold. They walked slowly back toward Walter's apartment. The streets were quiet except for the occasional passing car. You never married again? After Eleanor? Jordan asked. Walter shook his head. Once was enough for me. Some people get multiple great loves. I just got one. When they reached Walter's building, the old man hesitated at the steps. Would you like to come up for a few minutes? Place isn't much, but I've got some Bulls memorabilia you might find interesting. Jordan checked his watch. He had nowhere urgent to be. I'd like that. Walter's apartment was on the 3rd floor. He moved slowly up the stairs, waving off Jordan's offer to help. If I don't keep climbing them, I'll lose the ability, he explained. The apartment was small, but meticulously clean. Framed Bulls posters and team photos covered one wall. A glass cabinet displayed basketball trophies and memorabilia. Jordan noticed most were from the 1990s, the Bulls' championship era. Have a seat, Walter said, gesturing to a worn but comfortable-looking sofa. Can I get you something to drink? I have water, coffee, or... He opened a cabinet. A decent scotch I save for special occasions. Water's fine, Jordan said, not wanting Walter to fuss. As Walter went to the kitchen, Jordan noticed a framed photo on the side table. It showed Walter, much younger, with his arm around a woman who must have been Eleanor. Between them stood the same young man from the wallet photo, Bobby, wearing a graduation cap and gown. Walter returned with 2 glasses of water. He noticed Jordan looking at the photo. University of Chicago, class of 2006, he said proudly. Bobby was the first in our family to go to college. Got a scholarship and everything. Jordan nodded, noting again the past tense. The weight in Walter's voice when he spoke of his son was unmistakable now. Walter sat in an armchair across from Jordan, his hands folded in his lap. For a moment, he seemed to be gathering his thoughts. I suppose you're wondering why I never mentioned what happened to Bobby, he finally said, his voice quiet. Jordan set down his water glass. Only if you want to tell me. Walter took a deep breath. His eyes grew watery, but his voice remained steady. Car accident. 12 years ago. Rainy night, slick roads. He paused. He was 32. Jordan didn't offer empty condolences. Instead, he simply nodded and allowed Walter the space to continue if he wished. After that, Eleanor and we just kept going. What else could we do? Walter's gaze drifted to the Bulls' memorabilia on the wall. All this stuff was his. I couldn't bear to pack it away. Now Jordan understood. The connection to the Bulls, to him, was Walter's connection to his son. That's why the statue, Jordan said softly. Walter nodded, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. Bobby loved that statue. Said it captured your spirit perfectly. He smiled faintly. Keeping it clean feels like something he would appreciate. As to he, the evening grew late. Jordan knew he should leave, but something held him there. The shared understanding of loss, the unexpected connection with this humble man. Walter Hayes had indeed had more stories to tell, and Jordan found himself wanting to hear them all. But it was getting late. Jordan noticed Walter stifling a yawn. "I should go," Jordan said, standing. "Let you get some rest." Walter nodded, looking a bit embarrassed. These old bones need more sleep than they used to. At the door, Walter hesitated. "Michael, I hope you don't mind me asking, but could you keep our visits between us? I'm not looking for attention or charity." "Of course," Jordan replied, understanding the man's pride. "Your privacy is important. It's just, people treat you differently when they know you've got connections to someone famous." Walter looked down at his hands. "I'm just an old man who cleans a statue. I'd like to keep it that way," Jordan promised. But as he drove home, Walter's request puzzled him. Most people would brag about meeting Michael Jordan, maybe try to get something out of it. But Walter seemed almost afraid of people finding out. The next morning, Jordan called his friend Devin, who worked in operations at the United Center. "Hey, Dev, quick question. You know anything about an elderly man who cleans my statue? Comes late at night, maybe twice a month?" "Your statue? No, man. Maintenance crew handles that during regular hours." "Well, somebody's been cleaning it after hours. Been doing it for years, apparently." Devin sounded confused. "Security hasn't mentioned anything. Want me to check into it?" "No," Jordan said, quickly, remembering his promise. "Just curious. Thanks anyway." Later that morning, Tia came into his office with a manila folder. "I found some information on Walter Hayes," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Jordan opened it to find printouts of newspaper clippings and school records. The first was a yellowed newspaper photo from 1988, Walter with a high school basketball team holding a trophy. The caption read, "Coach Hayes leads Westside Bulls to city championship." "Seems like he was well respected," Tia said. "Coached for over 40 years, taught advanced math, won 3 city championships with teams that didn't have much funding or resources." Jordan flipped through more clippings. Walter receiving a teaching award in 1994, a brief mention of his retirement in 2011. Then came a more somber article from 2012. Local teacher loses son in tragic accident. The photo showed a younger Walter, his face etched with grief, standing beside a woman at a funeral. His son Bobby was an accountant at Parker & Wilson, Tia continued. Died in a car accident on Lakeshore Drive during a storm. Left behind a wife, no children. Jordan looked up. What about Walter now? His situation? Lives alone in an apartment on fixed income, teacher's pension plus Social Security. His wife died 3 years ago from cancer. No other family that I could find. Tia hesitated. The apartment building was recently sold to developers. Residents have received notice that leases won't be renewed after they expire. Jordan closed the folder, thinking about the proud old man in the worn Bulls jacket. Thanks, Tia. This is helpful. That afternoon, instead of attending a business meeting, Jordan found himself driving back to Walter's neighborhood. He didn't call first. Something told him Walter would insist he didn't need to come. Jordan knocked on the apartment door. No answer. He was about to leave when a neighbor poked her head out from across the hall. He's probably at the community center, the woman said. volunteers there most afternoons. The Oak Park Community Center was a brick building 6 blocks away. Inside, Jordan found Walter in a small room lined with tables, helping a group of kids with math homework. Walter looked up, surprise crossing his face when he spotted Jordan in the doorway. He excused himself from the students and came over. "Michael, this is unexpected. Hope I'm not interrupting." Walter shook his head. "Just volunteer tutoring. Math hasn't changed much since I retired." When the tutoring session ended, Walter gathered his teaching materials, worn textbooks, and handmade worksheets into a faded backpack. "Would you like to grab an early dinner?" Jordan asked. They walked to a small cafe where they could talk privately. After ordering, Walter looked at Jordan with curiosity. "2 visits in 2 days. Beginning to think you might be checking up on me." Jordan smiled. "Maybe I am." Walter's expression turned serious. "I don't need looking after, you know." "I know that," Jordan assured him. "But would it be so bad to have a new friend?" This seemed to catch Walter off guard. He studied Jordan's face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "No, I suppose not." Over dinner, Walter shared more stories about his teaching days. His face lit up when he talked about former students who had gone on to become doctors, engineers, and, yes, even a few professional athletes. Not NBA level, Walter clarified, but good college players. One made it to Europe. When they finished eating, Jordan insisted on paying. Outside, the evening air had turned chilly. Walter zipped up his Bulls jacket. "I've been thinking about your statue cleaning," Jordan said as they walked. "Why don't you let me arrange something official? You could be authorized to care for it." Walter's face clouded. "I told you, I don't want special treatment." "It's not special treatment. It's recognizing something you've been doing for years." Walter stopped walking. "Michael, please. I appreciate the thought, but I need this to stay as it is. Just an old man honoring a promise." "A promise?" Walter looked away. "To Bobby. He always said that statue wasn't kept clean enough." Jordan understood then. This wasn't just about basketball or fandom. It was about a father keeping a connection to his son. "Understand," Jordan said. "Your secret is safe with me." Relief washed over Walter's face. "Thank you." At Walter's apartment building, Jordan noticed peeling paint and a broken step. The building had seen better days. Inside Walter's apartment, Jordan accepted the offer of coffee. While Walter busied himself in the kitchen, Jordan noticed a framed Bulls ticket stub on the wall. Finals, Game 6, 1998, Jordan's famous last shot with the Bulls. Walter returned with 2 mugs. "Bobby and I were there," he said, nodding toward the ticket. "Spent a month's salary on those tickets, worth every penny to see that shot." As they sipped coffee, Jordan asked about Walter's plans, given that the building was being sold. Walter sighed. "Haven't figured that out yet. Apartments aren't cheap these days, even in this neighborhood." "You must have options," Jordan suggested. "At my age, options narrow considerably." Walter's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I'll manage, always have." When Jordan left that night, he made Walter promise to call if he needed anything. Walter agreed, though Jordan suspected the proud man would rather sleep on a park bench than ask for help. Driving home, Jordan couldn't stop thinking about Walter Hayes, a man who had given his life to teaching and coaching, who quietly honored his son's memory by cleaning a statue in the middle of the night, who now faced losing his home. Jordan had met countless fans over the years, signed thousands of autographs, posed for endless photos. But something about Walter was different. His dedication wasn't about celebrity worship. It was about connection, about keeping a promise to someone he had lost. By the time Jordan reached his own home, he had made a decision. Walter Hayes might not want help, but Jordan was going to give it anyway. He just needed to figure out how to do it without the old coach ever knowing. 2 weeks passed. Jordan had meetings in New York and couldn't check on Walter. He thought about calling, but remembered Walter didn't like using cell phones. Tiny buttons, big fingers, he had explained. When Jordan returned to Chicago. He drove past the United Center late one night. It was Walter's usual time to clean the statue. Jordan parked across the street and waited, watching the bronze figure standing tall under the security lights. No sign of Walter. Maybe he'd come earlier? Or maybe he was taking a night off. Jordan waited an hour, but the old coach never appeared. A feeling of unease settled in his stomach. Jordan drove to Walter's apartment building. It was after 11, but a light was on in what he thought was Walter's window. He pressed the buzzer for apartment 3C. No answer. He tried again, holding it longer. Still nothing. A young woman came out of the building, keys in hand. Jordan caught the door before it closed. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for Walter Hayes, in 3C. He's not answering." The woman looked surprised to see Michael Jordan standing in her building's lobby. "Mr. Hayes? I think he's in the hospital. Been gone a couple days now." Jordan's unease deepened. "Do you know which hospital?" She shook her head. "Sorry, Mrs. Gannon and 2B might know. They're friends." Jordan thanked her and knocked on Mrs. Gannon's door. A tiny woman with silver hair and thick glasses answered. "Mrs. Gannon? I'm Michael Jordan. I'm looking for Walter Hayes." Her eyes widened. "The basketball player? My goodness!" She peered up at him. "Walter's at Chicago Memorial. Collapsed right here in the hallway 2 days ago. I rode in the ambulance with him." "Is he okay?" Mrs. Gannon's face grew serious. "His heart. He's been having trouble for months, but wouldn't see a doctor. Too stubborn for his own good." Jordan thanked her and headed straight to Chicago Memorial Hospital. At the front desk, he asked for Walter's room. "Are you family?" the receptionist asked. "No, but I'm a close friend," Jordan replied. She checked her computer. "He's in room 412. Visiting hours are over, but..." She looked up at him, recognition dawning. "I suppose we can make an exception." Room 412 was a shared room with 2 beds. Walter was in the far bed by the window, looking small and frail against the white sheets. An IV line ran into his arm, and a heart monitor beeped steadily beside him. He was asleep, his breathing shallow. Indeed, the dim light, Jordan could see how pale Walter looked. The proud, independent man who had climbed 3 flights of stairs, rather than admit he needed help now, seemed fragile and vulnerable. Jordan sat in the chair beside the bed. He hadn't brought flowers or a card, hadn't thought that far ahead. He just sat there, watching Walter breathe, listening to the steady beep of the monitor. After about 20 minutes, Walter's eyes fluttered open. He looked confused, then focused on Jordan. "Michael?" His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "Hey, Coach, how are you feeling?" Walter tried to smile, but winced instead. "Been better." He looked around the room. "What time is it?" "Almost midnight. Visiting hours are over." Jordan shrugged. "Rules are meant to be broken sometimes." Walter tried to sit up, but didn't have the strength. Jordan pressed the button to raise the head of the bed slightly. "You didn't have to come," Walter said, embarrassment crossing his face. "Don't like you seeing me like this." "Like what? Human?" Jordan smiled gently. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Walter." Walter sighed. "Congestive heart failure, they say. Been feeling it coming on for months." He looked up at Jordan. "Your statue's getting dirty." was supposed to clean it tonight. The U.O. statue can wait. You need to focus on getting better. Walter nodded slightly, then looked away. They want to do surgery, put in some kind of device. His voice grew quieter. Insurance doesn't cover much of it. Jordan understood then. Walter's reluctance to see a doctor hadn't just been stubbornness. It had been fear of bills he couldn't pay. "Don't worry about that right now," Jordan said. "Just focus on what the doctors say you need." Walter's eyes, normally bright and alert despite his age, looked clouded with worry. "Easy for you to say. Not all of us made millions playing basketball." The words had no bite, just the plain truth, spoken by a man who had spent his life on a teacher's salary. "I'm scared, Michael." The admission seemed to cost Walter something. Not of dying, just of... He gestured weakly at the hospital room. All this. Decisions. Procedures. Bills. Jordan reached out and placed his hand on Walter's arm. "You're not alone in this." "I mean that." Walter closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his weathered cheek. "I miss Eleanor. She handled all the medical stuff. And Bobby..." His voice broke. "Parents aren't supposed to outlive their children." Jordan sat with Walter until he fell asleep again. Then he went to find Walter's doctor. Dr. Lynn Porter was reviewing charts at the nurses' station. She looked up as Jordan approached. "Mr. Jordan, I wondered if you might show up. Walter mentioned you were friends, but I wasn't sure whether to believe him." "How is he, really?" Dr. Porter led Jordan to a quiet corner. "His heart is failing. He needs a pacemaker and defibrillator implanted. Without it, his quality of life will deteriorate rapidly." She hesitated. "But as he may have told you, his insurance situation is complicated." "What's the cost?" "The procedure itself runs about $70,000. Follow-up care, medications, rehabilitation would add significantly to that." Jordan nodded. "And if he gets everything he needs, what's his prognosis?" "Good, actually. He's in reasonable health otherwise. Could have several good years ahead of him with proper care." "Make sure he gets everything he needs," Jordan said. "I'll take care of the costs." Dr. Porter studied him for a moment. "That's very generous. But Walter strikes me as a proud man. He might not accept such help." "He won't know it came from me," Jordan replied. "Can you arrange that?" She thought for a moment. "There are patient assistance programs. We could process it that way. He'd know he was getting help, but not the source." "Perfect." Before leaving, Jordan returned to Walter's room. The old coach was still sleeping. On the small table beside his bed lay his personal belongings, his wallet, his watch, a small notebook, and his pill bottles. Beside them was a folded bull's cap, worn and faded. Jordan picked up the cap, turning it over in his hands. This wasn't merchandise. It was old, probably from the 90s. Another connection to Bobby, most likely. He set the cap back down and quietly left the room. In the hospital parking lot, Jordan sat in his car, thinking. Walter needed more than just medical help. He needed someone to look out for him during recovery. He needed a place to live once the apartment building was sold. He needed purpose. Jordan pulled out his phone and called Tia. "I need you to set up a meeting tomorrow," he said. "Dr. Lynn Porter at Chicago Memorial, Marcus Reed from the Bulls Community Foundation, and see if you can get Tracy Mills, the principal at Westside Community High." "What's this about?" Tia asked. Jordan looked back at the hospital, thinking of the proud old man who had spent years caring for his statue in the middle of the night. "It's about keeping a promise," he said, "and maybe making a new one." The next morning, Jordan sat in a conference room at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Dr. Porter arrived first, followed by Marcus Reed, a former Bulls player who now headed their community foundation. Tracy Mills, the principal at West Side Community High, rushed in last, slightly out of breath. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Jordan began. "I need your help with something important." He told them about Walter, his years of teaching and coaching, his nighttime visits to clean the statue, and now his health crisis. He explained his plan to help Walter without damaging the man's pride. "Walter Hayes shaped hundreds of young lives at Westside," Jordan said. "Now he needs our help, but he's too proud to ask for it." Marcus nodded. "I've heard of Coach Hayes. He's a legend in Chicago high school basketball. He retired before I became principal," Tracy Mills added. "But his name still comes up whenever people talk about the golden years of Westside basketball." Dr. Porter reviewed Walter's medical situation. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. He'll need several weeks of recovery, then cardiac rehabilitation. He shouldn't be living alone during the initial recovery period. And he can't go back to his apartment anyway," Jordan said. "The building's being sold." For the next hour, they developed a plan. Marcus would handle the housing situation. Tracy would explore connections to West Side High. Dr. Porter would oversee Walter's medical care. Jordan would coordinate everything through Tia, keeping his own involvement minimal. "Remember," Jordan emphasized, "Walter can't know I'm behind this. He'd refuse the help out of pride." After the meeting, Jordan visited Walter again. The old coach looked slightly better today, some color returning to his face. "They're doing the surgery tomorrow," Walter said, nervousness in his voice. "You'll do great," Jordan assured him. "Dr. Porter is the best." Walter fidgeted with his blanket. "A hospital social worker came by earlier. Said there might be assistance programs to help with the bills." He looked suspicious. "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" "Me? I'm just a basketball player, Walter. I don't know how hospitals work." Walter didn't look entirely convinced, but let it drop. Jordan stayed with him, playing cards and talking about basketball to keep Walter's mind off the upcoming surgery. As a nurse came in to check Walter's vitals, Jordan noticed a small duffel bag in the corner. "Mrs. Gannon brought me some things from my apartment," Walter explained, following Jordan's gaze. "Clean clothes, toothbrush, and—" he hesitated. "Something special." After the nurse left, Walter asked Jordan to bring him the bag. From it, he carefully withdrew a basketball, its orange surface faded to almost brown, covered with signatures. 1996. Bulls, Walter said, his voice reverent. Championship team. Every player signed it. Jordan recognized it immediately. The team had signed thousands of items that year. Bobby's 16th birthday present, Walter continued, stood in line for hours at a charity event to get those signatures. He turned the ball slowly in his hands. "Your signature was right here." He pointed to a spot where the ink had faded significantly. Bobby touched it so often, he wore it down. Jordan took the ball, seeing his faded signature among his former teammates. This wasn't just memorabilia. It was a tangible connection between father and son. "I thought I might not make it through surgery," Walter admitted quietly. "Wanted. This with me, just in case." "You're going to be fine," Jordan said firmly, handing the ball back. "But I understand." As visiting hours ended, Jordan promised to check on Walter after the surgery. In the hallway, he ran into Dr. Porter. "Everything's set for tomorrow," she said, "and the financial arrangements have been processed through our assistance program." "Thank you," Jordan said, and Marcus found a temporary place for him to stay during recovery. A furnished apartment not far from here. Dr. Porter nodded. "Good. He'll need support." She hesitated. "He's stronger than he looks, you know. Patients with his spirit often surprise us." Jordan smiled. Nothing about Walter Hayes surprises me anymore. That evening, Jordan received updates from both Marcus and Tracy. Marcus had secured a short-term lease on a ground-floor apartment in a building with an elevator. No stairs for Walter to climb during recovery. Tracy reported that Westside High's current basketball program was struggling without dedicated coaching leadership. The position's been vacant for months, she explained over the phone. Budget cuts have hit us hard. Our gym is in bad shape too. After hanging up, Jordan sat on his couch, thinking. Walter needed purpose as much as he needed medical care. A man who had dedicated his life to coaching and teaching couldn't just sit in recovery with nothing meaningful to do. Jordan picked up his phone again and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. "Scotty, it's Michael. I need your help with something." An idea was forming. Something bigger than just helping one elderly man with medical bills and housing. If Jordan was right, this could give Walter Hayes much more than just a place to live. It could give him a reason to keep living. Walter's surgery went well. The doctors implanted both a pacemaker and a defibrillator to regulate his heart rhythm. Jordan visited him the day after, finding Walter groggy but stable. "Looks like I made it," Walter said weakly, attempting a smile. "Never doubted it for a second," Jordan replied. Over the next week, Walter grew stronger. Jordan visited daily, often bringing magazines about basketball or books about Chicago Bulls history. Sometimes they just played cards or watched old games on the small TV in Walter's room. Walter never mentioned the statue, but Jordan could tell it was on his mind. Once, while watching highlights from the '97 finals, Walter mumbled, "Hope nobody's messing with it." "With what?" Jordan asked, though he knew. "Nothing," Walter said, looking embarrassed. "Just thinking out loud." By the end of the second week, Dr. Porter declared Walter ready for discharge. The question of where he would go hung in the air during her morning rounds. "I can manage the stairs at my apartment," Walter insisted, though everyone knew he couldn't. "Actually," Dr. Porter said, reviewing her notes, "the hospital social worker has arranged temporary housing through a patient support program. Ground floor apartment, fully furnished. It's just for recovery, until you're stronger." Walter looked suspicious. "What kind of program?" "For patients who need support after major procedures," she explained smoothly. "You qualify because of your teaching background." It wasn't entirely a lie. Marcus had set up the apartment through a foundation that helped retired educators. Jordan's donation to the foundation had simply expedited the process. "I don't know," Walter began. "It's just temporary," Jordan reminded him. "And it's a program you qualify for. Nothing special about it." Finally, Walter agreed. That afternoon, Jordan offered to drive him to the new apartment. "You don't need to trouble yourself," Walter protested weakly, but his relief was obvious when Jordan insisted. The apartment was in a quiet building about 15 minutes from the hospital. It was small but bright, with a comfortable living room, bedroom, and kitchen. Someone had stocked the refrigerator with food and placed several houseplants on the windowsills. "This is too nice," Walter said, looking around with suspicion. "It's just temporary," Jordan reminded him. "Think of it as a hotel for recovery." Walter sank into an armchair, already tired from the short walk from the car. "I guess beggars can't be choosers." As Walter rested, Jordan explored the apartment. Marcus had done a good job. Everything Walter might need was there, including a medical alert button and grab bars in the bathroom. On the coffee table lay information about cardiac rehabilitation and a schedule of appointments. "You know," Walter said, watching Jordan, "I'm not a fool. I know something's going on." Jordan kept his expression neutral. "What do you mean?" Patient support programs don't usually provide furnished apartments, and that hospital bill was too small. Walter's eyes were sharp despite his physical weakness. "I don't know what strings you pulled, Michael, but I know you pulled them." "The important thing is that you're getting what you need," Jordan said, neither confirming nor denying. Walter sighed. "I've spent my life standing on my own 2 feet. Hard to accept help now." "You spent your life helping others," Jordan corrected him. "Now it's your turn." Later that evening, after making sure Walter had taken his medications and had dinner, Jordan prepared to leave. Walter walked him to the door, moving slowly but steadily. "Thank you," Walter said simply. "Not just for today, for everything these past weeks." "That's what friends do," Jordan replied. As Jordan drove home, he called Marcus to check in. "Everything good with the apartment?" he asked. "All set," Marcus confirmed. "He's got meals arranged for the next 2 weeks, and a home health nurse will check on him daily." "Any word from his old building?" "The official eviction notices went out yesterday. All tenants have to be out in 60 days." Jordan frowned. The temporary apartment would work for recovery, but Walter would need a permanent solution soon. "What about West Side High?" Jordan asked. "Tracy called earlier. She's excited about your idea. The school board meets next week." "Good. And Scotty?" "He's in. Said to tell you he's already called the others." Jordan smiled. His plan was coming together. Walter Hayes had given his life to basketball and teaching. Now basketball might give something back to him. The next day, Jordan arrived at Walter's apartment to find him shuffling around the living room, phone in hand. "Just got off with Mrs. Gannon," Walter explained. "We all got eviction notices yesterday. 60 days to find new places." He sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 79 years. "Don't worry about that now," Jordan said. "Focus on getting stronger first." Walter nodded absently, but the worry remained in his eyes. Jordan knew that for a man like Walter, uncertainty about the future could be as debilitating as his heart condition. "How about we go for a short drive?" Jordan suggested. "Doctor said short outings are good for you." "Where to?" Jordan smiled. "I thought we might swing by your old school, for old time's sake." Walter brightened immediately. "West Side, haven't been back since I retired." He pushed himself up from his chair with new energy. "Let me change my shirt." The drive to West Side Community High took about 20 minutes. Walter gazed out the window, occasionally pointing out landmarks from his past. "That corner store used to be a barbershop," he said. "And that lot was a basketball court where the neighborhood kids played. Bobby learned to dribble there." As they approached the school, Walter sat up straighter. West Side Community High was a 3-story brick building that had seen better days. The flagpole stood slightly crooked, and patches of the front lawn had turned brown. "Looks smaller than I remember," Walter remarked as Jordan parked. "Schools always do when you go back," Jordan agreed. Walter moved slowly, but with determination as they approached the main entrance. A security guard recognized Jordan immediately and waved them through with wide eyes. In the main hallway, faded championship banners hung from the ceiling. Some were from Walter's coaching days. "Those are yours?" Jordan asked, pointing up. Walter nodded, pride crossing his face. 1988, 1992, and 1997. Good teams, all of them. They passed trophy cases with dusty basketball trophies and team photos. Walter paused at each one, sharing stories about particular players or memorable games. Jordan listened, seeing how the memories brought life back to Walter's tired eyes. "See you, Huis." They turned a corner. A woman in a neat blue suit approached them, recognition lighting her face. "Coach Hayes, what a wonderful surprise." She extended her hand. "I'm Tracy Mills, the principal. We spoke on the phone a few years ago." Walter shook, her hand looking pleased to be remembered. "Nice to see you again, Ms. Mills." "And Mr. Jordan." She shook Jordan's hand with barely contained excitement. "This is quite an honor." "We were just taking a little walk down memory lane," Jordan explained. "Is it okay if we see the gym?" "Of course. Let me take you there myself." Tracy led them down a hallway lined with student artwork and motivational posters. She unlocked a set of double doors that opened into a large gymnasium. Walter stepped inside and stopped, taking it all in. The basketball court was worn, its lines faded. One of the backboards had a crack running along its side. The bleachers looked shabby, with several sections roped off. "It's seen better days," Tracy admitted, following Walter's gaze. Budget cuts hit the athletics program hard. Walter walked slowly to center court, his shoes squeaking on the polished wood. He stood there a moment, hands in his pockets, looking up at the championship banners hanging from the rafters. "We used to pack these bleachers," he said softly. "Standing room only for championship games." Jordan noticed a sign above the gym entrance. "Hayes Gymnasium," it read, though the letters were faded and one was hanging loose. "They named it after you," Jordan observed. Walter nodded. "When I retired. Nice ceremony. The mayor even came." He looked around the empty gym, his expression growing sad. "It's too quiet now." Tracy stepped forward. "Coach Hayes, would you mind if I asked you something?" Walter turned to her. "Of course not. Our basketball program has been struggling. We haven't had a dedicated coach for months. The last one left for a private school with better facilities." She hesitated. "I was wondering if you might have any advice for us, maybe suggestions for finding a new coach." Walter's eyes lit up. For the next 20 minutes, he talked passionately about what made a good school basketball program: dedicated coaching, consistent practice schedules, community involvement, and most importantly, showing players that someone believed in them. Jordan stood back, watching Walter come alive as he spoke about coaching. This was the Walter Hayes who had shaped young lives for over 40 years. Eventually, they made their way to a small trophy case in the hallway outside the gym. Inside were photos of Walter with various teams, certificates of achievement, and newspaper clippings about his coaching career. "My legacy," Walter said, a hint of sadness in his voice. "Gathering dust." As they continued their tour, Walter grew tired. Jordan suggested they head back, but Walter wanted to see one more place: the math classroom where he had taught for decades. Room 237 was now a computer lab, but Walter smiled as he looked around. "Different furniture, same view," he said, pointing to the window that overlooked the school's courtyard. "I stood at that board for 40 years, trying to get teenagers excited about algebra." On their way out, they passed a group of students shooting hoops on an outdoor court. The young players were using a ball with cracks in it, and one of the hoops was missing its net. Walter stopped to watch them. "Those boys have talent," he observed. "Raw, but there's potential." One of the students noticed Jordan and froze mid-dribble, his mouth dropping open. Soon all the players had stopped, staring in disbelief. Jordan waved and called out, "Keep practicing." As he and Walter walked back to the car, the excited voices of the students carried across the yard. "Did you see that? Michael Jordan?" "Was that for real?" Walter chuckled. "You just made their year." In the car, Walter was quiet, lost in thought. Jordan didn't push conversation, letting him process the visit. Finally, as they neared the apartment, Walter spoke. "Those kids today don't have much to inspire them," he said. "No decent equipment, no dedicated coach." He shook his head. "When I was teaching, basketball gave some of those kids their only reason to come to school." "It made a difference to them," Jordan agreed. "I hope so." Walter looked out the window. "You know what bothers me most about getting old, Michael? feeling useless, like the world's moved on and doesn't need you anymore. Back at the apartment, Walter was tired from the outing, as Jordan helped him into his favorite chair. Walter pointed to a large manila envelope on the coffee table. "Eviction notice came in today's mail," he said. "Official now, 60 days. Jordan nodded, making a mental note to talk to Marcus about speeding up the housing search. "Don't worry about that now," he said. "One step at a time, remember?" After making sure Walter had everything he needed, Jordan prepared to leave. At the door, Walter called out to him, "Thank you for today. Seeing the old school. It meant a lot. You're welcome. Get some rest." As Jordan drove away, he called Tracy Mills. "How did it go?" she asked immediately. "Perfect." He didn't suspect a thing, but seeing the gym in that condition hit him hard. "It wasn't an act," Tracy said. "We really do need help with our basketball program." "Well," Jordan replied, "I think I might have a solution that works for everyone." The next morning, Jordan met with Tracy Mills in her office at Westside Community High. The principal looked hopeful as Jordan outlined his ideas. "Coach Hayes has decades of experience," Jordan said. "And from what I saw yesterday, he still has the knowledge and passion." Tracy nodded. "We would love to have him involved with our basketball program in some capacity, but there are challenges. Our budget can't support a full-time coach, and his health might not allow for the demands of coaching." "What if money wasn't an issue?" Jordan asked. Tracy raised her eyebrows. "That would change things considerably." Jordan spent the next hour learning everything he could about Westside's basketball program. The team hadn't had a winning season in 5 years. The coaching position had been vacant for months. Funding for sports had been cut repeatedly. Equipment was old and inadequate. But Tracy insisted that many students had talent and interest. They just lacked guidance and proper facilities. "These kids need something to believe in," she said. "Something that's theirs." After leaving Westside, Jordan drove to Scottie Pippen's house. His former teammate greeted him with a big smile. "Been a while, MJ," Scottie said, leading him to a comfortable den lined with basketball memorabilia from their playing days. Jordan explained the situation with Walter and his idea for involving the old coach with Westside's basketball program. "So you want to rehab the gym?" Scottie asked. "More than that," Jordan replied. "I want to create something that lasts, something that honors Walter's legacy and helps those kids at the same time." Scottie nodded slowly. "You're thinking bigger than just a donation. Much bigger. But I need help from people who understand what basketball can mean to kids who don't have much else." As they talked, Jordan's vision expanded. By the time he left, Scottie had agreed to contact other former Bulls players who might want to be involved. Next, Jordan met with Marcus Reed at the Bulls Community Foundation office. Marcus had already gathered information about similar programs in other cities. "We could establish a youth development center," Marcus suggested, spreading blueprints and photos across his desk. "Basketball would be the draw, but we could include tutoring, career development, mentoring, all the things Walter believes in. And Walter could oversee it without the physical demands of full-time coaching," Jordan added. "Exactly. We'd need a proper facility, staff, and funding, of course." "Money isn't an issue," Jordan said. "But Walter's pride is. This can't feel like charity." Marcus understood. "We'll make it about his expertise, not his needs. He'd be the director because he's the best person for the job, not because we're helping him." Jordan nodded. "That's perfect." Later that afternoon, Jordan brought Tia into his office to coordinate all the moving parts. She took detailed notes as he outlined the plan. "We need to move quickly on this," Jordan said. "Walter has to be out of his apartment in less than 60 days now. and I want everything ready before then." "What about his medical care?" Tia asked. "Dr. Porter says he's doing well, but he'll need ongoing treatment. Whatever facility we create needs to be accessible for him." Tia organized the information into action items and timelines. "And all of this has to happen without Walter knowing you're behind it?" "For now, yes. Once everything's in place, we can figure out how to present it to him." While his team worked on the plans, Jordan continued visiting Walter regularly. The old coach was getting stronger each day, though he tired easily. During these visits, Jordan made sure to ask questions about Walter's coaching philosophy and teaching methods, gathering information that would shape the new program. "You know what made my team special?" Walter said during one visit. "We didn't always have the most talented players, but they believed in each other. They looked out for each other on and off the court." Jordan listened carefully. "That sounds like more than just basketball coaching." "It was never just about basketball," Walter replied. "It was about teaching them to be good people. Basketball was just the tool I used." During another visit, Jordan brought classic Bulls games to watch. As they viewed the games, Walter shared coaching strategies and stories about the hundreds of students he had mentored over the years. "That boy there," Walter said, pointing to a young man in one of his old team photos, "came from a terrible situation at home. Basketball gave him structure, purpose. He's a doctor now." Jordan noticed that Walter came alive when talking about his former students. His eyes brightened, his voice grew stronger, and he gestured with his hands as he had probably done thousands of times while coaching. One evening, Jordan arrived to find Walter looking troubled. The coffee table was covered with apartment listings, all with prices far beyond Walter's budget. "Housing markets changed since I last looked," Walter said, frustration in his voice. "Can't find anything in my price range that isn't a closet or in a dangerous neighborhood." Jordan wanted to tell Walter not to worry, that he was working on a solution. Instead, he simply helped him sort through the listings, all while knowing that Walter wouldn't need any of them. 2 weeks later, Jordan met with his entire team: Scotty, Marcus, Tracy, Dr. Porter, and Tia, to review the final plans. Architectural drawings showed a new facility to be built adjacent to Westside High. Budgets outlined operating costs and staffing needs. Curriculum plans detailed basketball training alongside academic support programs. "This is incredible," Tracy said, looking through the materials. "It would transform not just our basketball program, but the entire school culture." "And Walter would be perfect to run it," Scotty added. "His experience in both basketball and education makes him uniquely qualified." "Is his health up to it?" Marcus asked Dr. Porter. "With reasonable accommodations, yes," she replied. "The pacemaker is doing its job. He'll need to pace himself, but having purpose is actually good for his recovery." Jordan reviewed the timeline. "Construction can begin next month and be completed in 6 months. In the meantime, we can renovate the existing gym as a temporary facility." "The question remains," Tia said. "How do we present this to Walter? He's too proud to accept what might look like charity." Jordan thought for a moment. "We don't present it as helping him. We present it as him helping us, helping these kids who need exactly what he can offer." Everyone nodded in agreement. The plan was set. Now they just needed the right moment to bring Walter into it. That moment came sooner than expected. The next day, Jordan visited Walter and found him sitting at his small dining table, a rejection letter in his hand. "From an apartment complex," Walter explained, his voice flat. "5th, one this week. Either too expensive or they want someone younger." He sighed heavily. 40 days left before I have to be out. Not that I'm counting." Jordan sat across from him. You're getting stronger every day. That's what matters. Can't live on good health alone, Walter replied. Need a roof, too. Jordan watched Walter carefully fold the letter and add it to a growing stack. The old coach looked defeated in a way Jordan hadn't seen before, not even in the hospital. Listen, Jordan said, making a quick decision. I have an idea. There's a small gathering at the United Center tomorrow evening. Nothing fancy. Would you like to come? Walter looked up, suspicious. What kind of gathering? Just some Bulls people, past and present. Thought you might enjoy meeting them. Walter hesitated. I don't know, Michael. I'm not much for crowds these days. It's small, Jordan assured him, and I'll be with you the whole time. After some persuasion, Walter agreed. The next day, Jordan arranged for a car to pick Walter up. When the sleek black sedan arrived at the apartment, Walter was waiting outside, wearing his best button-up shirt and his old Bulls jacket. This seems fancy for a small gathering, Walter commented as he settled into the back seat. Just a perk of knowing the right people, Jordan replied with a smile. When they arrived at the United Center, Walter was surprised to see they were heading to the main entrance rather than a side door. As they approached, he spotted Scottie Pippen waiting for them. Is that Scottie Pippen? Walter asked, his voice rising slightly. Jordan nodded. Told you there'd be Bulls people. Walter's eyes widened as Scottie walked over to greet them. Coach Hayes, Scottie said, extending his hand. Michael's told me a lot about you. It's an honor to meet the man who's been looking after MJ's statue all these years. Walter shook Scottie's hand, looking stunned. The honor's mine, Mr. Pippen. Please, call me Scottie. Together, they led Walter through the quiet arena toward the court. Walter looked around in confusion. Where is everyone? I thought there was a gathering. Almost there, Jordan assured him. As they approached the court, Walter could see a small group of people standing near center court. As they got closer, he began to recognize some of them. Former players he had coached, students he had taught, now adults with families of their own. What is this? Walter asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Jordan could answer, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit center court, illuminating Jordan's statue, which had somehow been moved from its outside location to the middle of the court. Walter stopped walking, confusion crossing his face. How did... The statue began to rise slowly, revealing another statue beneath it. A bronze figure of a man in a coaching stance, clipboard in hand. As the second statue became fully visible, Walter gasped. It was him. That's... me? Walter's voice broke. Jordan nodded. A companion to mine. It will stand outside the United Center, right next to the original. A tribute to all the coaches and teachers who inspire young players. Walter stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. Scottie gently led him closer to the statue. Cast in the same style as Jordan's, it captured Walter's determined expression. The way he stood on the sidelines during games, straight-backed, focused, clipboard ready. I don't understand, Walter said, looking from the statue to Jordan. Why? Would you do this? Jordan smiled. That's just the beginning. He led the stunned Walter to a table where Marcus waited with architectural plans. As Marcus unveiled them, he explained, "This is the Walter and Bobby Hayes Youth Development Center. It will be built next to West Side High." Walter's hand trembled. As he touched the drawings, the plans showed basketball courts, classrooms, and meeting spaces. The facility will house basketball training, academic tutoring, and career development resources, Marcus continued. And we need a director, someone who understands both basketball and education. Walter looked up, realization dawning on his face. That's where you come in, Jordan said. We need you, Walter. These kids need you. Me? Walter's voice was barely audible. But I'm just... You're exactly what this program needs, Scotty interrupted. Someone who knows that basketball is about more than just the game. Former students stepped forward, sharing stories of how Walter had changed their lives. One man, now a high school principal himself, explained how Walter had kept him from dropping out. A woman who became a professional coach described how Walter had believed in her when no one else did. As each person spoke, Walter's tears flowed freely. When they finished, he turned to Jordan. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why would you do all this?" Jordan placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "You showed me what it means to care for something bigger than yourself. Teaching young people, maintaining my statue all those years. You did it because you believed in something. Now we believe in you." Walter looked around at the faces surrounding him, Jordan, Scotty, his former students, all waiting for his answer. "I don't know what to say," Walter admitted. "Say yes," Jordan replied. "These kids need a coach, Walter. They need you." Walter looked at the statue again, then at the architectural plans. His hands trembled as he traced the name on the blueprints. Walter and Bobby Hayes Youth Development Center. "You put his name on it," Walter said softly. Jordan nodded. It seemed right. Walter took a deep breath. The room waited in silence for his answer. "Yes," he finally said. "I'll do it." The group erupted in applause. Walter's former students surrounded him, shaking his hand and patting his back. For a moment, Walter looked overwhelmed by the attention, but then his coach's instincts took over. He began asking questions about the facility, the program structure, the timeline. "The existing gym will be renovated immediately," Marcus explained. "That gives us a place to start while the new center is being built." "When can we begin?" Walter asked, a spark returning to his eyes. "Construction starts next month," Jordan said, "but you can start planning the program right away." Tracy Mills stepped forward with a folder. "Here's information about our current students, Coach Hayes. Many of them have potential, but no direction." Walter took the folder eagerly. Already, his mind was working on how to build a program that would serve these young people. As the evening continued, they moved to a conference room where food had been arranged. Walter sat at the head of the table, the place of honor, with Jordan and Scotty on either side. The conversation flowed naturally as they discussed basketball, education, and their shared vision for the youth center. "There's one more thing," Jordan said when there was a lull in the conversation. He nodded to Marcus, who brought over another set of blueprints. "These are plans for the director's residence," Marcus explained, unrolling the drawings. "A small house adjacent to the center, part of the compensation package." Walter stared at the plans. "You mean you'll have a place to live?" Jordan confirmed. "Accessible, comfortable, and close to work." For a moment, Walter seemed unable to speak. Then he looked up at Jordan, his eyes swimming with tears. "Why?" he asked again. "Why me? Why all this?" Jordan considered his answer carefully. "Because some people deserve to be honored while they're still here to see it. Because you gave 40 years to those kids at Westside. Because what you did matters." Walter nodded slowly, accepting this explanation. But there was still wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening to him. As the evening wound down, people began to leave. Walter thanked each person individually, his voice growing hoarse with emotion. Finally, only Walter, Jordan, Scotty, and Marcus remained. "I should get you home," Jordan said. "It's been a big night." Walter nodded, clearly tired but energized in a way Jordan hadn't seen before. In the car, Walter was quiet, processing everything. Then he looked at Jordan with new awareness. "The hospital bills," he said. "The apartment. Now this." He shook his head. "It was all you, wasn't it?" Jordan didn't deny it. "You're not the only one who can help people quietly, Coach." Walter looked out the window. "All these years, I thought I was invisible. Just an old man cleaning a statue." His voice caught. "But you saw me. You weren't invisible, Walter. What you did mattered." When they reached Walter's temporary apartment, Jordan walked him to the door. Before going inside, Walter turned to him. "There's something I need to show you," he said. "Something I've kept to myself for a long time." Inside, Walter went to a drawer and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he removed a folded piece of paper, soft and thin from years of handling. He handed it to Jordan. It was a hospital bill from Chicago Memorial, dated 12 years ago. Bobby Hayes' name was at the top. The total at the bottom was staggering, over $200,000. Across the bill was stamped, "Paid in full," with a transaction number. "Bobby's accident," Walter explained. "He lived for 3 days in intensive care. We had some insurance, but..." He gestured at the bill. "This would have ruined us. Eleanor and I were preparing to sell our house, cash in our retirement, everything." Jordan studied the bill, not understanding. "Then, one day, this arrived," Walter continued. "Paid in full. No explanation. Just a transaction number that led back to some corporation I couldn't trace." Walter's eyes held Jordan's. "It was you, wasn't it? Even back then?" Jordan stared at the bill in shock. He remembered now. His foundation had covered medical expenses for families in crisis. There had been a request about a dedicated Chicago teacher who had lost his son in a car accident. Jordan had approved the payment without ever knowing the teacher's name. "I never knew it was you, Walter," Jordan said softly. "I just knew someone needed help." Walter sat heavily in his chair. "All these years, I never knew who to thank. That's why I started cleaning your statue, Michael. It was the only way I could think to say thank you to someone I couldn't thank in person." The two men sat in silence as the full circle of their connection became clear. For 12 years, they had been linked by an act of kindness neither fully understood until this moment. "That night you caught me at the statue," Walter said. "I was terrified you'd be angry. Instead, you bought me coffee." He smiled at the memory. "Never imagined we'd end up here." Jordan handed the bill back to Walter. "Some things are meant to be, I guess." "Do you believe that?" Walter asked. "That things happen for a reason?" Jordan thought about the seemingly random sequence of events that had brought them to this moment. His sleepless night, Walter's nighttime cleaning, the chance encounter. "I do," he finally said. "Sometimes the most important connections in our lives start in the most unexpected ways." Walter carefully folded the bill and returned it to his wallet. "Bobby would have loved all this, you know. The center, the statue, everything." His voice grew wistful. "He always said you were more than just a basketball player, that you understood what really mattered." Jordan smiled. "Sounds like he was a smart kid." "The smartest," Walter agreed, "just like his mother." As Jordan prepared to leave, Walter walked him to the door. The old coach stood straighter now, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you, Michael," Walter said. "Not just for tonight, for everything." Jordan shook his hand. "The real work starts tomorrow, Coach. Those kids are waiting." Walter's eyes brightened at the word coach. It was who he had always been and who he would be again. "I'll be ready," he promised. 2 months later, Jordan stood with Walter at the EDOP groundbreaking ceremony for the Walter and Bobby Hayes Youth Development Center. The day was bright and clear, perfect for the outdoor event. A small crowd had gathered: school officials, former students, community members, and a handful of reporters. Walter looked different now. He stood straighter, his eyes clear and focused. The pacemaker was doing its job, and having a purpose had energized him in ways medicine couldn't. He wore a new Bulls jacket that Scotty had given him, though he'd insisted on keeping his old one too. "Too many memories in that jacket to let it go," he'd explained. The temporary program had already started in the renovated gym at Westside. 3 times a week, Walter worked with students on basketball skills and life lessons. Jordan occasionally stopped by to watch, enjoying the sight of Walter in his element, clipboard in hand, teaching young players the fundamentals. "Back and elbow straight," Walter would call out. "Follow through with your wrist." Today was special, though. Today they would break ground on the permanent facility. As the ceremony began, Tracy Mills welcomed everyone and introduced Walter. He stepped forward to speak, looking momentarily overwhelmed by the attention. Then he straightened his shoulders and found his coach's voice. "Basketball taught me many things," Walter began. "Teamwork, discipline, perseverance. But most importantly, it taught me that we're stronger together than alone." He spoke about his years at Westside, the students he'd taught, and his vision for the new center. He didn't mention his health struggles or housing situation. Instead, he focused on the future, what the center would mean for the community and its young people. "This center isn't about me," Walter insisted. "It's about giving kids a place to belong, to grow, to believe in themselves." When it was Jordan's turn to speak, he kept his remarks brief. "Some people see a basketball as just a ball," he said. "Walter Hayes sees it as a tool to build character. That's why this center will bear his name." After the speeches, Walter and Jordan posed with ceremonial shovels, turning over the first dirt where the center would stand. Cameras flashed, people applauded. Walter looked almost embarrassed by the attention, but Jordan could see the pride in his eyes. As the crowd dispersed, Walter pulled Jordan aside. "There's something I need to ask you," he said, his expression serious. "Something that's been bothering me." Jordan nodded. "Of course." "My statue," Walter began, looking uncomfortable. "It's a great honor, truly. But does this mean I can't clean yours anymore?" Jordan laughed, relieved the question wasn't more serious. "You can clean both of them now, Coach." Walter smiled. "Good, because I made a promise." Later, they walked through the renovated gym where Walter had been working with students. Basketball hoops gleamed with new nets. The floor had been refinished. New equipment lined the walls. "The kids can hardly believe it," Walter said. "Some of them have never played with a decent ball before, let alone on a court like this." Jordan watched as Walter moved around the space, pointing out improvements and sharing plans for programs. This was where he belonged, teaching, coaching, making a difference. "You know," Walter said, pausing by the center court logo, "for a while after Bobby died, I wasn't sure I had a reason to keep going. Eleanor kept me anchored. But when she passed," he shook his head, "I was just existing, not living." Jordan nodded, understanding. "Now I wake up with purpose again," Walter continued. "These kids need me. This program needs me." He looked at Jordan. "Thank you for that gift. It's worth more than any statue." As they left the gym, a group of students arrived for the afternoon program. They greeted Walter with respect and excitement. "Coach Hayes, Are you going to show us that passing drill today? Did you see the news? They showed you on TV. Is that really Michael Jordan with you? Walter handled the attention with ease, introducing Jordan to each student by name. It was clear he already knew their strengths, weaknesses, and personalities. "These are my new champions," Walter said proudly. "They just don't know it yet." Before Jordan left, he and Walter sat on a bench outside the gym. The spring day was warm, birds singing in nearby trees. In the distance, they could see the construction site where the new center would rise. "Bobby would have loved this," Walter said quietly. "Seeing his name on something that helps kids." Jordan nodded. "I think he would be proud of you, Walter." Walter took a deep breath, looking out at the horizon. "You know, I never told you why I was cleaning your statue that night." "You said it was to thank me," Jordan reminded him, "for Bobby's hospital bill." "That's partly true," Walter admitted, "but there's more to it." He turned to face Jordan. "It was the anniversary of Bobby's death. I always did something special on that day to remember him. That night, I decided to clean your statue because you were his hero." Jordan felt a lump form in his throat. "I never expected to meet you," Walter continued. "Just wanted to do something Bobby would appreciate." He smiled slightly. "Life takes strange turns, doesn't it?" As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Walter checked his watch. "I should get back. The kids will be waiting." Jordan stood, extending his hand. Walter shook it firmly, his grip stronger than it had been months ago when they first met. "Will I see you at the opening ceremony?" Walter asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Jordan promised. 2 months later, Jordan stood among the crowd at the ribbon cutting for the completed center. Walter, looking distinguished in a new suit, cut the red ribbon to enthusiastic applause. As cameras flashed, he smiled and waved, every inch the respected coach and educator he had always been. Standing slightly behind him was a group of students wearing new team uniforms with Hayes Center Bulls across the front. Their faces shone with pride as they followed their coach into the gleaming new facility. Jordan watched as Walter Hayes began this new chapter, surrounded by young people who needed exactly what he had to offer. The old coach had found his purpose again, and it had all begun with an elderly man cleaning a statue late at night, and a basketball legend who decided to find out why. That's where our story ends today, with a chance encounter that changed 2 lives forever. Where are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below and let me know if this story touched your heart. If you enjoyed this tale of unexpected connection and kindness, please hit that like button to help spread these positive messages to others who might need them. And if you're ready for another emotional journey, click on the video appearing on your screen right now. Until next time, remember that sometimes the smallest gesture of kindness can change everything.